The gravel crunched under my tires, a welcome, familiar sound after miles of pitted asphalt that had long ago given up the pretense of being a maintained road. My hands, usually stained with linseed oil and the patina of centuries, gripped the steering wheel with a precise, almost clinical tension. Every antique I touched, every splintered veneer and tarnished bronze, demanded a certain reverence, a meticulous attention to detail. This new project, however, promised to be a different beast entirely. My great-aunt's solicitor had described it as a fixer-upper, a term I suspected was a polite euphemism for a structural catastrophe. The manor finally emerged from behind a dense thicket of skeletal oaks, a hulking silhouette against the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't just large, it was ancient, its stone façade the color of old bone, scarred by weather and time. Gables jutted like broken teeth, and rows of vacant windows stared out, reflecting the dying light with a cold, glassy indifference. I slowed the vehicle to a crawl, taking in the scene. The overgrown drive, the crumbling stone wall half swallowed by ivy, the sheer, oppressive scale of it all. This wasn't just a house, it was a monument to neglect. A gust of wind, smelling of damp earth and something vaguely metallic, whipped around the vehicle, rattling the windows. It felt less like arriving at an inherited property and more like disturbing a slumbering leviathan. Stepping out, the silence was immediate and profound, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the persistent whisper of the wind through the tall, unkempt grass. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of decay, not just wood rot, but something deeper, dustier, like forgotten memories themselves had a distinct odor. I grabbed my toolkit, the familiar weight a small comfort against the sprawling unknown. The massive oak front door, studded with corroded iron, groaned open with a sound like a dying beast. My beam cut through the gloom, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. Dust motes danced in the solitary shaft, a dizzying ballet in the stagnant air. The floorboards, once grand parquet, were warped and buckled, covered in a thick, uniform layer of grit. My initial thought, the professional one, was of the sheer scope of the restoration. This wasn't merely a project, it was an archaeological dig. The ceiling, lost in the upper reaches of the hall, must have been magnificent once. Now, it was a canvas of water stains and peeling plaster. I swept the beam across what might have been a grand staircase, its banister a ghostly outline beneath a shroud of cobwebs. I moved slowly, methodically, my footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the vast emptiness. My intention was just to get a lay of the land, to understand the challenge. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just absorbing the atmosphere, cataloging the damage. The main living areas were choked with shrouded furniture, looming like silent specters. In the dining room, a long table was barely discernible beneath its dust sheet, a macabre feast waiting for guests who would never arrive. The kitchen, when I found it, was a fossilized relic, ancient appliances coated in a greasy film, the air thick with the smell of old grease and something else, something vaguely sweet and sickly. My flashlight beam picked out skeletal cobwebs hanging from every surface, trembling with every slight vibration I made. I pushed deeper, past a pantry filled with empty, dusty jars, and through a narrow, unlit corridor. My breath plumed in front of me. I was about to turn back, feeling the first tendrils of unease beyond professional assessment, when I heard it. A low, steady thrum. It was faint at first, a vibration more than a sound, barely registering over the frantic thump of my own pulse. I stopped, straining my ears. There it was again, a persistent, mechanical hum, utterly out of place in this mausoleum of a house. It wasn't the wind, nor the creaking of old timber. This was engineered, deliberate. I followed the sound, my hand gripping the cold metal of my flashlight. It led me to a heavy wooden door, set into the wall of what looked like a service passage. The hum was stronger here, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to seep into the floorboards beneath my boots. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Inside, the hum intensified, almost vibrating through my chest. The room was surprisingly compact, though still draped in a fine layer of dust. It was a laundry room with humming machines. Two massive, archaic washing machines, their enamel chipped and faded, sat against one wall. Next to them, an equally ancient dryer. The humming emanated from all three, a unified, low-frequency drone that filled the space. They weren't moving. No drums spun, no water sloshed, yet they hummed. A deep, electrical thrum, as if they were perpetually powered, perpetually on, even after decades of disuse. I knelt, examining the thick, braided cords that snaked from their backs into the wall. They looked ancient, brittle. There was no main power to the house, I was certain of it. I hadn't seen a meter, hadn't heard a generator. This wasn't just neglect. This was impossible. The air in the laundry room, despite the mechanical hum, felt stagnant, heavy. A faint, almost imperceptible scent hung in the air, like ozone mixed with something sweet and metallic, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was profoundly wrong. I ran a hand over the cold metal casing of one of the washing machines. The hum resonated through my fingertips, a living pulse. My mind, usually so precise, so focused on the tangible, felt a strange dissonance. My great-aunt had been gone for years, the house abandoned. So why were these machines humming? And what, exactly, had they been waiting to clean? This manor, I realized with a sudden, sickening clarity, was far more than just a fixer-upper. It was something else entirely. Something awake. The hum in the laundry room with humming machines was a low, resonant thrum against my palm, a vibration that seemed to seep into my bones. My great-aunt had been gone for years, the house abandoned, left to decay in its own slow, dusty fashion. So why were these machines alive? I pulled my hand away, the air suddenly colder than the metal had been. I scanned the tangle of cords behind the row of vintage appliances. Each one, a sturdy, pre-war behemoth, sat silent now, the hum having vanished the moment I focused on it. My gaze snagged on the power outlets. Every single plug, heavy and old-fashioned, hung loose, dangling inches from its socket. Unplugged. All of them. A shiver traced its way up my spine, a cold, prickly feeling that had nothing to do with the damp chill of the room. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough plaster of the wall, seeking something solid, something rational. This was impossible. My mind, usually so precise, so focused on the tangible, felt a strange dissonance, like two gears grinding against each other, refusing to mesh. The faint, cloying scent of stale detergent, mixed with something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood and roses, seemed to cling to the air, making my stomach clench. I backed out of the laundry room with humming machines, pulling the heavy oak door shut behind me with a soft thud that echoed through the empty hallway. My breath hitched. It was just the house settling, I told myself, just the old wood groaning under the weight of years. But the rational explanation felt thin, translucent, barely covering the unease that had begun to bloom in my chest. I needed to work. I needed the familiar comfort of my tools, the smell of wood and polish, the tangible process of bringing something forgotten back to life. I retreated to what I designated as my temporary workshop, a large, dust-choked study on the ground floor, lined with empty bookshelves and dominated by a magnificent, if severely neglected, mahogany writing desk. This desk would be my first project. I laid out my chisels, my fine-grit sandpaper, my selection of oils and waxes on a drop cloth spread over the floor. The afternoon sun, weak and watery, filtered through the grimy window panes, illuminating dancing motes of dust in the stagnant air. I began by carefully cleaning the desktop, wiping away layers of grime and cobwebs with a soft cloth. The wood beneath, though scratched and dulled, promised a rich, deep luster. I was meticulously sanding a particularly stubborn water stain near the inkwell when I heard it. A faint scratching sound, like fingernails dragging across a wooden board, coming from the far corner of the room, near the empty fireplace. I paused, my hand hovering over the desk. I listened, straining. Nothing. I dismissed it as mice, or the house settling again. This place was old, after all. I went back to work, my focus returning to the grain of the mahogany. A few minutes later, I reached for my smallest chisel, a delicate instrument I used for fine detailing. It wasn't where I'd left it. I distinctly remembered placing it on the left side of my working area, next to the bottle of linseed oil. Now it was on the right, nestled amongst a pile of larger, coarser tools. I frowned. My precision was usually absolute. Had I moved it unconsciously? Unlikely. I picked it up, a faint prickle of irritation replacing the earlier unease. My mind was playing tricks on me, I decided. The isolation, the strangeness of the house, it was getting to me. I was carefully prying open a stiff drawer, trying not to damage the delicate dovetail joints, when a movement in my peripheral vision made me jump. A flicker, quick and indistinct, near the doorway. Just the settling dust motes, perhaps a trick of the fading light. My heart gave a sudden, hard thump against my ribs. I found myself pausing more often, listening. The house was never truly silent. There were always faint creaks, groans, the distant sigh of the wind through broken panes, but now, each sound seemed amplified, imbued with a watchful quality. I started to feel it, a subtle but persistent pressure, like an unseen gaze boring into the back of my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see. What? A figure? My rational mind scoffed at the notion. I was alone here. Completely. As twilight bled into dusk, I decided to tackle the intricate lock mechanism of the desk's central drawer. It was jammed, rusted solid. With a delicate touch and a tiny screwdriver, I managed to loosen a pin. There was a faint click, and the drawer slid open with a groan of protest. Inside, nestled amongst a few desiccated spiders and a thick layer of dust, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It was heavy for its size, intricately engraved with swirling, almost organic patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. I picked it up. The clasp was stiff, but with a gentle pressure, it sprang open. Inside, there was nothing. No faded photograph, no tiny lock of hair. Just empty space, polished smooth as if something had been worn away entirely. It looked like a tangled knot, or a stylized, leafless tree, but it was so faint, so worn, that I couldn't quite make it out. It just felt wrong. The air around me suddenly felt heavy, thick with an unspoken presence. I was no longer alone. I pulled my hand abruptly from the cold metal of the washing machine, the low thrumming reverberating through my fingers long after contact. It wasn't a gentle hum, like a refrigerator or a distant transformer. This was a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to burrow into the very marrow of my bones, a living pulse beneath the rust-flecked enamel. So why were these machines alive? A prickle of unease crawled up my neck. I scanned the laundry room with humming machines, a small, windowless space tucked away in the manor's oldest wing. Dust motes danced in the single shaft of light filtering through a grimy vent high on the wall, illuminating the ancient appliances. The washing machine, a hulking, top-loading contraption, and a matching dryer, stood side by side, both emitting that unnerving, mechanical purr. They weren't just running, they sounded like they were working. I moved cautiously towards the washing machine first, its circular lid stubbornly shut. My fingers brushed the dial, stiff with age and disuse. It was set to heavy-duty wash, and a faint, stale odor of damp linen and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, clung to the air around it. I tried to turn the dial to off, but it wouldn't budge. Frozen. I gave it a harder twist, the plastic groaning under my grip, but it remained fixed, the hum continuing its relentless rhythm. Next, the dryer. Its door was also sealed. I pressed my ear to its cold surface. The sound inside was different, a low, grinding rumble, like heavy stones tumbling slowly. No heat emanated from it, just that same persistent vibration. This was impossible. There was no power to the house, not yet. I'd seen the ancient fuse box, the corroded wires. I'd walked past the main power line, severed years ago. Yet here they were, stubbornly, impossibly, alive. My gaze drifted to the wall behind the machines. It was a patchwork of rough-hewn stone and plaster, clearly an interior wall, but it looked off. One section, about 4 feet wide and 6 feet high, was smoother, newer, the plaster a slightly different shade, almost as if it had been repaired, or perhaps, covered. A new surge of determination pushed past the unease. This manor was full of secrets, and I, Reed, was an expert in unearthing them. I ran my hand along the suspicious section. It felt solid, but the plaster work was amateurish, uneven. My fingers found a subtle indentation near the bottom, where the baseboard should have met the wall. It wasn't a crack, but a slight recess, as if something had been wedged there. I retrieved a small, flat pry bar from my toolkit, which I'd left leaning against the doorframe. The hum of the machine seemed to intensify as I worked, a low, mocking growl. I inserted the pry bar into the recess, applying gentle, steady pressure. A faint groan of old wood, then a soft pop. A section of the baseboard came away, revealing not the expected wall studs, but a narrow, dark gap. My heart hammered a rhythm against my ribs that almost matched the machine's. I shone my flashlight into the opening. It wasn't deep, maybe a foot, but it led into a cavity behind the wall. My beam illuminated a small, wooden box, nestled amongst dust and cobwebs. I reached in, my fingers brushing against the rough, splintered wood. It was heavier than it looked. I pulled it out, setting it carefully on the grimy floor. There was no lock, only a simple, sliding clasp. My hands trembled slightly as I worked it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of decaying velvet, was a single, leather-bound journal. Its cover was unadorned, the leather cracked and dry, smelling faintly of mildew and something else, something sharp, like dried blood or old iron. I opened it. The entries were dated, spanning several decades from the late 1800s. It wasn't a personal diary, not exactly. It read more like a chronicle, a record of the manor itself, or perhaps, the region surrounding it. The initial entries were mundane: weather observations, notes on crop yields, repairs made to the house. But as I flipped through the brittle pages, the tone shifted. A blank space in her mind where laughter once resonated. She wept, but could not recall the reason. The old women say it is the house, taking what it desires. A slow erosion, they call it. I fear it takes more than memories. It takes the very essence. Another, from 1903, a stranger came to the village, a traveling merchant. He stayed a week at the inn. Spoke of his home, his family, his trade. Then, one morning, he woke, eyes vacant. He could not recall his name, nor the purpose of his journey. He wandered aimlessly, a shell. The house has many appetites. Asterisk, my breath hitched. I looked up from the journal, my gaze sweeping the laundry room with humming machines again. The hum seemed louder now, more insistent, a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floorboards, through my very shoes. The metallic, sweet smell was stronger too. Almost cloying. I felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt of confusion. Why was I in this room? What was I doing here? I held the journal in my hands, its leather cover warm against my palm, but for a fleeting, terrifying second, its purpose, its meaning, evaporated. I knew I had just read something profound, something important, but the specifics were hazy, like trying to recall a dream upon waking. The journal, I mumbled aloud, my voice sounding foreign in the vibrating room. The house. The erosion. My mind felt like a sieve, letting crucial details slip through. I frowned, trying to grasp the thread. My great-aunt's house. I was restoring it. That much I knew. But what about the journal? What did it say about? About what? The words were right there, printed on the page, but my brain refused to connect them, to form a coherent narrative. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trying to clear the fog. It was just stress, I told myself. The isolation, the endless work, the sheer scale of this decaying manor. It was getting to me. I hadn't slept properly in days. That had to be it. My mind was playing tricks. Distant. A client's name, for a restoration project I just completed last month. A very important client. What was it? I could picture the antique clock, the intricate carving, the delicate mechanism. But the name of the owner, the person who had commissioned me, was gone. A blank space. Just like Ilara's child's face. This wasn't just stress. This was different. This was an erosion. And it had already begun.